Good evening, traveler. Tonight, I want to tell you about a castle I once found deep within the forest, a place long forgotten by roads and maps alike, and about the quiet spirit that waited there, not for vengeance nor for company, but for someone who might finally understand what it was trying to say. So, settle in, and let us unfold this story together. It was many years ago now, though the memory has remained unusually clear in my mind. Some places have a way of doing that. I had been traveling through a stretch of woodland that rarely sees visitors, the kind of forest that grows slowly and with patience, where the trees stand far older than the paths between them. The road I had been following for most of the afternoon had thinned gradually, until it was little more than a suggestion beneath the fallen leaves. Not lost exactly, but no longer concerned with guiding anyone anywhere in particular. Evening had begun its quiet arrival by then. The sunlight no longer fell straight through the canopy, but slid sideways between the trunks, turning the air a warm shade of amber before slowly surrendering to dusk. The forest had grown calm in that familiar way it often does when day prepares to step aside. Birdsong softened, the breeze quieted, and the small creatures of the undergrowth began their patient preparations for night. It was during that gentle hour, when light and shadow seemed equally unsure of themselves, that I noticed the stone. At first it was only a corner of grey among the roots of a large oak, so weathered that it might easily have been mistaken for natural rock. But the forest has a way of teaching one's eyes to notice what does not quite belong. This stone had edges, carefully cut ones. I brushed aside the moss that had grown over it and found the corner of an old wall. That alone was not unusual. The woods are filled with remnants of old things that people have built and later forgotten. But as I moved further along the rise where the stone lay, more shapes revealed themselves. Another wall, then the curve of an archway, and finally, just beyond a line of tall pines, the unmistakable outline of towers rising above the trees. A castle, or rather, what had once been one. Time had softened its edges. Vines had claimed much of the stone, and parts of the outer wall had collapsed long ago. Yet enough remained standing that its former presence could still be felt. It stood quietly among the trees, as though the forest had simply grown around it and agreed to keep its secret. I remember pausing there for a moment, not out of fear, but because places like that deserve a little patience before you enter them. The air around the castle felt still, but not abandoned. If anything, it felt as though the place had been waiting a very long time for footsteps to return. Eventually, curiosity won the small argument it had begun with caution. I walked toward the old gate, or what remained of it. The wooden doors had long since rotted away, leaving only the iron hinges attached to the stone arch. Moss had grown thick across the threshold, undisturbed for years. I stepped through. The courtyard beyond was larger than I had expected. Grass had pushed its way between the cobblestones, and a small birch tree had taken root beside what must once have been a fountain. The basin of the fountain was cracked now, its water long gone, though rain had left a shallow mirror across the stone that reflected the dimming sky above. The castle itself rose along the far side of the courtyard. 3 towers remained intact, though their roofs had partially collapsed. Tall windows stared down into the courtyard, dark and empty, or so they seemed. I walked slowly across the stones, my footsteps soft against the moss. The great doors of the main hall stood partially open, not broken, not fallen, simply open. That was the first detail that gave me pause. Wind might move a loose door once or twice, but these doors had been opened carefully. Not recently, perhaps, but deliberately. Still, curiosity is a stubborn companion on quiet evenings. And so I stepped inside. The great hall of the castle was vast, though time had not been gentle with it. The ceiling beams remained strong, but the banners that had once hung between them had faded to colorless threads. Dust rested thick across the stone floor, undisturbed except for the faint patterns left by drifting air. At the far end of the hall stood a large hearth, built of dark stone, its chimney stretching upward into the tower above. Cold now, long cold, but not forgotten. I took a few steps further inside. The air carried that particular scent old buildings sometimes hold, a mixture of stone, dry wood, and time itself. And then something curious happened. A curtain along the far wall shifted slightly, just a small movement, the kind one might easily blame on a stray breeze. But the windows nearby were closed. I stood still for a moment. Nothing moved again. The silence of the hall returned, deep and patient. So I continued exploring. There were several doorways leading away from the great hall, each opening into different corridors of the castle. I chose one at random and followed it deeper inside. The corridor was narrow, lit faintly by the last of the evening light slipping through tall windows along the outer wall. My footsteps echoed softly on the stone. Then, somewhere ahead of me, another step sounded. Not loud, not hurried, just a quiet footfall somewhere around the bend in the corridor. I stopped. The sound stopped as well. For a moment the castle seemed to hold its breath. Then another step, soft, measured, almost hesitant. The sort of sound someone might make if they were unsure whether they wished to be followed or noticed. I cannot say I felt afraid. There was something in the sound that lacked hostility. If anything, it carried the strange weight of someone trying very carefully to be heard. I followed. The corridor curved gently to the right, leading me toward a small study room with tall shelves lining the walls. The door stood open. Inside, the room was quiet. Dust covered the shelves where books had once been kept. Most had long since fallen apart, leaving only fragments of leather bindings scattered across the floor. But one object remained untouched, a desk, and upon it, a single folded letter. The parchment was yellowed with age, though the ink upon it remained surprisingly clear. I unfolded it carefully, and there, written in a careful hand, were the following words. If you are reading this, traveler, then you have found the castle after I could no longer remain in this world. Do not be alarmed if the halls feel attentive. I have not yet been able to leave them. My body has long since returned to the earth. but my spirit remains tied to this place. There is something unfinished here, something the castle still remembers, though I no longer know how to complete it. The answer lies in the light the castle once held. Restore it, and perhaps both of us may finally rest. I read the letter twice before setting it back upon the desk. The castle remained quiet around me, but now the silence felt different, not empty, listening, and somewhere in the corridor behind me, another quiet footstep sounded, not threatening, not distant, just close enough to suggest that the writer of the letter was still somewhere within the walls. I did not turn immediately when I heard the step behind me. In places that have waited a long time for company, sudden movements rarely improve matters. Instead, I folded the letter carefully along the lines it had once held and placed it back upon the desk. The parchment made a soft whisper against the wood as it settled there. The air in the study had grown slightly cooler, not sharply so, just enough to be noticed. Then, just beside the doorframe, something moved again. A faint disturbance in the dust along the stone floor. Another step. I turned slowly. The corridor beyond the study remained empty. Yet the dust upon the floor told a quieter story. A faint mark had appeared there, no deeper than the impression a careful traveler might leave when stepping lightly upon dry soil. Then another appeared a few paces farther down the hall, and another. The marks continued along the corridor, forming a gentle path deeper into the castle. I remained where I stood for a moment, considering. The letter had asked for the castle's light to be restored. But a castle, as you may know, holds many kinds of light. Torches, hearth fires, lanterns, candles. Which of them the spirit meant was not yet clear. The next footprint appeared, not far from the others, just around the corner of the corridor. It seemed the castle had decided where my search should begin, so I followed. The corridor turned toward the center of the castle, where the walls grew thicker and the windows fewer. The evening light that had guided me earlier faded here, leaving the passage dim and quiet. Yet the path remained easy enough to follow. Each time I paused, another faint step appeared ahead. The spirit did not hurry, and so neither did I. Eventually the corridor opened into a circular chamber within the base of the tallest tower. A spiral staircase climbed along the inner wall, its steps worn smooth by years of passing feet. The air here carried the faint scent of old soot. That alone was enough to suggest where the path might lead. I placed my hand lightly against the stone railing and began to climb. The tower stairs curved slowly upward, each turn revealing a little more of the dim light filtering through narrow windows in the outer wall. Halfway up the staircase, the air stirred. A quiet movement brushed past my shoulder, not cold, not warm, simply present. Then another step sounded above me, still guiding, still patient. By the time I reached the top of the tower, night had begun its full arrival outside. The final chamber was small and circular, its ceiling sloping inward toward the remnants of what had once been a lantern platform. The metal frame of the lantern still stood in the center of the room, but the glass panels had darkened with age, and the lamp within it had long since gone out. Dust covered the floor here as well, though not quite as thickly. I stepped closer. The lantern itself was large, built to shine far beyond the castle walls. Once lit, it would have cast its glow across the forest canopy for miles. A beacon for travelers, for those lost in the woods, for anyone who might need to find their way. As I studied the lantern, something shifted near the window. A curtain stirred slightly, though no wind entered the tower. Then, on the floor beside the lantern, a faint mark appeared in the dust. Not a footprint this time, a circle, carefully drawn. Within it, a small line, like the shape of a flame. I looked again at the lantern. The castle must remember the light. The words from the letter returned quietly. This tower had once carried that light for the forest, and now it stood dark. I searched the chamber carefully. The old lantern had not been broken. Its metal frame remained strong, though the glass had grown clouded with time. Beside the wall, tucked into a narrow alcove, I found what I had hoped might still remain. A small iron box. Inside it rested several things: a bundle of old candle stubs, a small flask of lamp oil, and a flint striker. Someone had left them there long ago, perhaps believing they might one day be needed again. The spirit had been waiting for someone who could use them. I cleaned the lantern glass as best I could with the scrap of cloth from my pack, clearing enough of the soot that light might pass through. Then I filled the lantern's basin with the remaining oil. The wick had grown dry with age, but not ruined. Some things, like certain promises, wait longer than we expect. I struck the flint. The first spark died quickly. The second caught. A small flame bloomed at the tip of the wick. At once the tower chamber changed. Light filled the room slowly at first, then stronger as the flame steadied itself. The lantern glass carried the glow outward through the narrow windows, casting long golden beams across the darkening forest. For a moment, the entire castle seemed to breathe. And then something remarkable happened. Far below, somewhere in the great hall, a faint glow answered. Another light had appeared. I descended the stairs again, following the warmth of the lantern's glow as it spilled down the tower walls. By the time I reached the great hall, the change had spread further. The old hearth, cold for many years, had begun to flicker faintly, not with flame, but with embers. A soft red glow pulsed deep within the ashes, and along the hall's long walls, iron torch brackets began to shine faintly, as though remembering the warmth they once held. The castle had remembered. The spirit had been right. Light had returned. I stood quietly in the center of the hall as the glow deepened. The air warmed slightly. The dust stirred gently across the floor. And then, near the far end of the hall, a shape appeared. Not solid, not quite visible, more like a suggestion of a person standing where the light fell strongest. Tall, still, peaceful. The figure did not move closer. It simply remained there, bathed in the soft gold of the returning light. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then the faintest inclination of the figure's head appeared, like a quiet bow offered in gratitude. The air shifted again. A soft wind moved through the hall, though none of the doors had opened, and slowly, very slowly, the shape dissolved into the light around it, not vanishing, not fleeing, simply resting. The warmth in the hall remained, but the presence had gone. At last, the castle felt truly empty, not abandoned, just finished. I stayed there a while longer, tending the lantern and adding a small fire to the hearth so the light might remain through the night. Outside, the forest had grown still beneath the stars. The towers of the old castle now glowed gently among the trees, their windows carrying the lantern's light into the darkness beyond. Anyone wandering the woods that night would have seen it. A castle no longer forgotten, a beacon returned, and somewhere, perhaps far beyond those walls, a spirit finally free to walk where it wished. When the fire had settled into a steady bed of embers, I stepped outside into the courtyard. The birch tree beside the fountain stirred softly in the night breeze. Above me, the tower lantern burned steadily. Its light stretched out over the forest canopy, warm and patient. I watched it for a while. Then I continued on my way. Some places ask very little of us. Just a moment of attention, a little patience, and the willingness to listen to what quiet things have been trying to say all along. The embers beside you are glowing softly now, traveler. The night beyond the firelight has grown calm and deep. Somewhere in a forest not so different from this one, an old castle stands again with light in its tower, and the spirit that once waited there has finally found its rest. You are safe to rest as well. Good night, my friend. May the quiet places you pass through remember your kindness, and may every light you restore find its way back to you.